While her husband was on a business trip, Audrey finally decided to organize the storage closet. She brought a step stool to reach the top shelf and reached for the old mason jars of pickled vegetables. But as she pulled one of the jars out, she froze, seeing what had fallen from above. Mitchell had left on Sunday evening, a man of few words as usual. He left his suitcase by the door, the dark blue one with the frayed handle that Audrey had given him for their 3rd wedding anniversary. Back then, she still chose gifts with meaning, imagining how happy he would be. Since then, that suitcase had traveled halfway across the country. Its corners were scuffed, and the zipper on the side pocket had long stopped closing properly. Every time Mitchell promised to fix it, and every time he forgot. He put on his shoes, straightened up, and patted his pockets out of habit. Phone, keys, wallet. His gaze slid somewhere behind Audrey toward the mirror in the entryway, and he said, "All right, I am heading out. I will be back on Friday, maybe earlier. I will call when I land." Audrey nodded. He leaned in and briefly touched her cheek, like stamping a document. She caught the scent of his cologne, the woodsy one she bought him every year for Christmas, because he had mentioned once that he liked it. He said it exactly one time, 7 years ago. Since then, she bought it. Since then he used it. He never asked about it again, never thanked her. He just took it from the bathroom shelf the way someone takes a toothbrush. The door closed, the lock clicked. Audrey stood in the hallway, listening to his footsteps on the stairs. The building was a pre-war brick walk-up, and every step echoed with a hollow, dull thud. Then the footsteps faded, the heavy front door slammed, and silence fell. She stood there, thinking that she could not remember when she had stopped waiting for him. Not in the sense of waiting for his return from a business trip, although that, too. But really waiting for him to say something warm over dinner, to hug her out of nowhere, to ask how her day went and actually want to hear the answer. That feeling had faded without a specific moment, without a fight or resentment. One day, she just realized that his departure evoked nothing in her. Neither anxiety nor relief, only emptiness, a habit like turning off the light before bed. They had been together for 9 years. They met at a mutual friend's birthday party. Mitchell had arrived late. His suit jacket was soaked through because he had been caught in a sudden downpour, and all evening he told jokes that made Audrey laugh until her sides hurt. He worked for a mid-sized construction firm, constantly driving between sites, and talked endlessly about them, about the clients, about how a raccoon once got into the site trailer and shredded all the blueprints. Audrey worked as an accountant at a local medical clinic. Life was simple, predictable, and Mitchell fit into it easily, as if he had always been there. The first 3 years were real. Every summer they drove down to the Outer Banks, renting a small room from an older woman who brought them fresh peaches from her garden every morning. They fought over silly things. He never squeezed the toothpaste from the bottom of the tube. She took too long to get ready when they were running late. They made up quickly, sometimes in funny ways. He would come home with a warm box of chocolates and say, "This is my white flag." They chatted late into the night, lying in the dark, and Audrey fell asleep, feeling that there was truly someone next to her. Then something began to slip away. Without abruptness, without screaming matches, Mitchell started working more. He moved to a large corporate firm with frequent travel and irregular hours. He started coming home later, sharing less. At first, Audrey asked how his day was, what was new. But his answers grew shorter. Normal, same old, "I am tired. Let us talk later." Eventually, she stopped asking, not out of spite. She just got used to it. They learned to exist side by side like two objects on the same shelf. They did not bother each other, but they did not touch either. In the evenings, Mitchell sat on the couch scrolling through his phone. Audrey read or watched shows on her tablet in the kitchen. On weekends, he went to the garage to tinker with his car, even though the car did not seem to need that much attention. Sometimes they ate dinner together, and silence hung over the table. Not heavy, not hostile, just empty. Like in a waiting room where everyone is waiting for something no one can name. Once over coffee, her friend Lauren asked, "Audrey, are you and Mitch doing okay? You two have been so quiet lately." Yes, Audrey replied, surprised by how easily the word slipped from her lips, the exact same way it did for Mitchell. On Monday, Audrey took a personal day off work. She had a pile of chores built up. She needed to pack away the winter clothes, wash the windows since spring had arrived, and organize the bathroom cabinet where empty shampoo bottles had sat for months next to full ones. The kind of small details that make up a household when you are running it alone. By early afternoon, it was the storage closet's turn. Tiny, 5 feet by 3, windowless with a weak light bulb that had been flickering for 2 years. Mitchell called it his territory. He kept his tools there, some cardboard boxes and mason jars of homemade pickles that his mother sent and no one ever ate. Audrey was used to staying out of it, not because he explicitly forbade it, but because every time she tried, he would say, "Do not touch anything in there, I have my own system. I will sort it out myself later." And she did not touch it for a year, 5. But that Monday, something shifted. Maybe she was just sick of that eternal phrase about sorting it out later. Maybe she just wanted a truly clean slate in every aspect of her life. Audrey opened the closet door, turned on the flickering light, and looked over the shelves. Tools on the bottom, a box of nails and screws, a drill in a dusty case. On the middle shelf, those large mason jars with cloudy brine where cucumbers and peppers were faintly visible. On the top shelf, cardboard boxes, an old coffee maker, and behind them, what? Something she had never noticed before. Audrey went to the kitchen for the step stool, climbed up, reached out and pushed aside one jar of pickles, then another, then a third. Her fingers brushed against something flat, metallic and cold. She tried to carefully pull it out, but the box was heavier than it looked. Her fingers slipped, the tin edge scraped her palm, and the box tumbled down. It hit the hardwood floor with a dull thud. The lid popped off, and the contents spilled everywhere. Photographs, papers, a keychain with a little plush bear, and something small and colorful, a page from a notepad with a drawing. Audrey stepped down from the stool and dropped to her knees. The first photograph, Mitchell without his jacket in a gray t-shirt, she thought they had thrown away a long time ago. He was smiling, not that polite half-smile she had grown used to in recent years, but a wide-open smile just like in their old photos from the beach. Next to him was a young woman in her early 30s, a brunette with a soft round face and dimples on her cheeks. She was smiling too, resting her head on his shoulder. In Mitchell's arms was a little girl around 5 years old, wearing a funny Santa hat with a pom-pom. In the background, a decorated Christmas tree, tinsel and blinking string lights reflected in a window. The second photograph, summer. The same little girl now in a sundress and sandals, her braid messy. Mitchell is holding her hand. They are in a park by a fountain. Both are laughing. The girl has her head thrown back, and Mitchell is looking at her with an expression Audrey recognized instantly, even though she had never seen it directed at anyone else. Pure, unfiltered, genuine tenderness. She picked up the page from the notepad, a child's drawing, a lopsided house with a triangular roof and smoke coming from the chimney, a yellow sun in the corner, and 3 figures, a large one, a medium one, and a very small one. At the bottom in clumsy, careful, childlike handwriting, letters still being formed. "Daddy Mitch, I love you." Audrey sat on the floor of the closet for a long time, holding the paper with both hands. The light bulb flickered, went out for a second, and then buzzed back to life. From the kitchen came the steady ticking of the wall clock, the pendulum one his mother had given them when they moved in, which Audrey had always wanted to take down, but never did. She carefully set the drawing aside and started gathering the rest. An apartment lease agreement. A 1-bedroom, 500 square feet, 3rd floor. Tenant name, Mitchell. Address. A neighboring suburb, Oak Park, a street Audrey knew because in the summer there was a great farmer's market there where she loved buying ripe tomatoes and fresh basil. Lease term, 5 years, renewed 3 times. The last time was in January. Receipts from a children's clothing store, winter boots, size 11, and a pink unicorn backpack. A set of watercolor paints. Date last week and a greeting card, a standard one from a pharmacy with a painted bouquet on the cover. Inside, in neat, feminine, slightly tired handwriting, "We are waiting for you at home. We miss you, your girls." Audrey folded everything back into the box, closed the lid, and set it on the floor next to her. She did not cry. She waited for the tears to come. It seemed like they should, that this was the normal reaction when you discover something like this. But instead of tears, there was something else. A strange, almost physical clarity, as if she had been looking through a fogged-up window for a long time, gotten used to the blurry shapes, and accepted them as reality. And someone had just wiped the glass with a rag. Everything became sharp, precise, almost painfully detailed. She stood up, carried the box out of the closet, set it on the kitchen table, and spent another hour methodically going through its contents, just like she did at work when checking quarterly financial reports. Every document, every photograph, every receipt. The first lease agreement was signed 6 years ago. Audrey did the math in her head. 3 years before the frequent business trips began, which meant it started even earlier. That meant that back when they were still chatting at night, when they were still visiting his mother on weekends, when she still believed they were just going through a rough patch, he was already renting an apartment in the next town over. That night, Audrey lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling. Next to her, on the other side of the bed, was the usual emptiness, just like when he went away. Before, on nights like this, she would fall asleep quickly. Silence, no one snoring, no one tossing and turning. Now the silence was different. She was not thinking about the pain. The pain was somewhere nearby, standing outside the door, but it had not entered yet. Audrey was thinking about the logistics. How did this all work in practice? 6 years, 2 apartments, 2 homes, 2 women, each believing she knew where he spent his nights. This required more than just lying. It required a system, a strict schedule, and control. She recalled all the business trips, at least 1 or 2 a month, sometimes more. Did he ever show her his boarding passes? Audrey tried to remember and could not. He used to at first, then he stopped. Then she stopped asking. She remembered an evening 4 years ago, when she finally gathered her courage and said, "Mitch, do you not think it is time we thought about having a baby? I am 33, time is passing." He put down his phone, looked at her seriously, and answered with a smoothness that left no room for argument. "Audrey, how can we afford a baby right now? We need to get on our feet financially first, build up our savings. Let us revisit this in a couple of years," she agreed. She always agreed, not because she was weak, but because his arguments always sounded reasonable, logical, well thought out, like a man planning their future. Now she understood he already had a daughter. When he told her it was too early, the little girl in the photo was about a year old. He held her in his arms, smiled at the camera, bought her boots and paints, and then came home, lay down next to Audrey, and fell asleep without a single muscle in his face twitching. Audrey rolled over and pulled the blanket up to her chin. Outside, cars drove by. In the neighboring apartment, a television murmured through the wall. A regular night, a regular apartment. Only everything she considered regular had just turned out to be a theatrical set, carefully constructed, meticulously maintained, and convincing enough for her to mistake it for real life for 9 years. From the keychain, she had removed a standard brass key with a blue plastic head, slipped it into her robe pocket, and put everything else back into the box. In the morning, Audrey woke up early before the alarm, before sunrise. The kettle boiled, then cooled down. She never made the tea. She sat at the kitchen table in her robe, watching the sky lighten outside the window, rolling the blue-headed key between her fingers. Small, light, completely ordinary. The kind that opens standard locks in standard apartment buildings. She could put it back, close the closet, forget, never go, never find out, and keep living the way she had in familiar silence, familiar routine, familiar ignorance. But something inside her had already shifted and had no intention of moving back. She got dressed, jeans, a blouse, a jacket. She paused by the mirror in the hallway and did not recognize herself, not physically. Her face was the same, with the same fine lines at the corners of her eyes. Her hair was pulled back into the same low bun, But her gaze was different, like someone who has already made a decision, but has not yet spoken it aloud. She ordered a rideshare on her app, typing in the address from the lease agreement. The driver, an older man with a thick mustache, listening to classic American rock on the radio, glanced in the rearview mirror and asked where to drop her off. Right at the entrance, Audrey replied, even though she had no idea what the building looked like. The drive took about 20 minutes. The neighborhood was familiar. Audrey used to come here for the farmer's market, buying ripe tomatoes from a woman who always tossed a handful of fresh dill into the bag, saying, "Take it, sweetheart, fresh from the garden." But she had never walked further than the market. The streets grew narrower, the houses shorter, 4-story brick buildings, small lawns with blooming lilacs, a quiet, settled residential neighborhood where neighbors knew each other by sight. And the old ladies on the benches were not just decorations, but the neighborhood watch. The car stopped. Audrey got out and looked at the building. Red brick, 4 stories, freshly painted black railings. In the courtyard, yellow metal swings, one seat slightly crooked, and a sandbox next to it. A forgotten plastic bucket lay in the sandbox. On a second-floor balcony, someone had hung a window box with geraniums. The bright red flowers burned against the brick. Audrey walked into the building. It smelled of fried chicken and something floral. Someone had left a potted violet on the windowsill between floors. The stairwell was clean. A notice about a tenant meeting and an ad for a local plumber hung on the bulletin board. 3rd floor door on the left. Audrey stopped looking at the white doorbell. A mat with the word welcome lay beneath it. She thought that it was probably wrong to show up without warning, without a plan, without a rehearsed speech. She did not even know what she was going to say. "Hello, I am your man's wife. Sorry, but I need to know." It sounded ridiculous, like a cheap soap opera. She rang the doorbell. Fast, light footsteps echoed from the other side. The lock clicked. The door opened. The woman from the photograph stood on the threshold. Up close, she looked both younger and older than in the pictures. Her face had no makeup. Her skin slightly pale with those dark circles under her eyes that appear on women who have not slept well in a long time but have stopped noticing. A dark green cardigan worn at the elbows, her hair pulled into a messy bun sliding to the side. She looked at Audrey for a second. 2, 3. In her eyes there was something. Not fear, not anger, but recognition, as if she had been waiting for this visit. Not necessarily today, not necessarily from Audrey, but waiting for the day someone would come and make it all real. "You are his wife," she said. There was no questioning intonation in her voice. "Yes," Audrey replied. Silence. In a room deep inside the apartment, a cartoon was playing, judging by the goofy voices. The woman took a step back. "Come in." The hallway was narrow, cluttered with little kids' shoes on a mat and a pink umbrella in the corner. Jackets hung on the coat rack, 1 adult, 2 children's for fall and winter. On a small table sat hand lotion, a detangling hairbrush, and a drawing taped to the wall, a blue dog with 6 legs and the caption, "Buster." "Chloe is in her room," the woman said, pointing to a closed door where the cartoon sounds were coming from. "I will be right back." She led Audrey into the kitchen. Tiny, maybe 60 square feet, no more. A table pushed against the window, 2 stools. On the windowsill, a pot of wilting petunias and a plastic sippy cup with leftover chocolate milk. On the refrigerator, souvenir magnets and 3 drawings held up by a ladybug-shaped clip. In one of them, Audrey recognized the exact same style. A lopsided house, a sun, 3 figures. "Coffee?" the woman asked automatically, the way one asks any guest. "No, thank you." They sat across from each other. The woman placed her hands on the table. Her fingers were trembling slightly, and she pressed them against the wood to make them stop. "My name is Mallory," she said, "though you probably already know that." "No," Audrey replied. "I did not know anything until yesterday. I knew absolutely nothing." Mallory nodded, took a deep breath, and looked out the window into the courtyard. Down below on the asphalt, some kids were kicking a soccer ball. Their voices and laughter floated up. "I am 32, she began. Her voice was steady, devoid of drama, like someone telling a story not for the first time, even if she had only ever told it to herself before. "Chloe is 5. turning 6 in the fall. She paused. I met Mitchell 7 years ago. I was working as a sales manager for a building materials supplier. He came in as a contractor's representative, negotiating prices. Charming, easy to talk to with that smile. You know, when a person smiles, and it feels like they are smiling just for you. Audrey knew that was exactly how he had smiled at her 9 years ago at that birthday party in his wet jacket. He told me from the start that he was married. Mallory continued. Did not hide it, but said that things with his wife had been over for a long time, that they were only living together because of the apartment, that moving out was complicated, some issues with joint property and debt. He did not go into details, but he kept saying, I am resolving this issue in a month, in 6 months after the holidays, after we pay off the loans. There was always a specific timeline, and that timeline always got pushed back. She rubbed the bridge of her nose. I waited. At first I believed him. Then I just got used to believing him. Those are different things, if you know what I mean. When I got pregnant, he said this would speed everything up. That now he had a real reason that he would talk to his wife right after the holidays. Chloe was born, the holidays passed, and he just kept coming over a couple of times a week, staying the night, leaving in the morning, or dropping by on weekends. He said his wife was used to it, that they lived like roommates, that she did not even notice. Audrey listened, feeling a strange split in her mind. These words were about her life, about how she did not notice. Mallory was describing the other side of the wall while Audrey had stood on this side, absolutely certain they were just going through a rough patch. I was a fool, Mallory said without self-pity. I just did not want to admit it for a long time, because admitting it meant being alone with my daughter. And being alone is scary, especially when he walks through the door. Chloe runs to him, hugs him, and yells, Daddy. And you think, fine, let it be this way, it is better than nothing. Audrey did not interrupt. She looked at Mallory and thought, we were both fools, we both believed him, we both waited. Only to each of us, he told his own version of the same lie. To Audrey that everything was fine. They had just drifted apart a little, as happens in marriage. To Mallory that his marriage was dead and he would finalize the divorce any day now. From the other room came the sound of a little girl laughing, a loud, ringing laugh. Only little children know how to laugh like that with their whole bodies. Mallory glanced toward the sound and for a second her face transformed. It became soft open. Then she turned back to Audrey. 3 days ago, I found a piece of paper in his jacket pocket. He left his coat here. It was a phone number and a woman's name, not yours. She stood up, walked into the bedroom, and returned with a standard blue file folder, held shut with an elastic band. He kept this here, said there was no room at his place, that these were work documents. I never go through other people's things. But after I found that number, I looked inside. She placed the folder on the table between the empty sippy cup and the salt shaker. Look. Audrey opened the folder. Her hands were not shaking. She surprised herself. Somewhere in the back of her mind she noted, wow, my hands are not shaking at all. As if her body already knew what was coming and braced for the impact. First, printed bank statements, columns of numbers, dates, account numbers, small but regular amounts. 2 or 3 times a month over the course of a year and a half. Money was transferred from Mitchell and Audrey's joint checking account, the one where his paycheck went, and where Audrey transferred her half for the mortgage, utilities, and groceries, into an account in Mahler's name. Audrey looked up. Mallory shook her head. I thought it was his money. He said it was from side jobs, bonuses. I never checked the source account. Second, printed email correspondence. Mitchell and a guy named Ryan. From the context, it was clear Ryan was a friend who dealt with car sales or insurance. Mitchell was asking if there was a way to sell a car registered in his wife's name without her knowledge or signature. Ryan cautiously replied, possible. But you need her signature on the title transfer, or her presence when signing the papers at the DMV or a public notary. Mitchell asked follow-up questions, looking for loopholes. Audrey thought about their car, a gray sedan she bought with her own money 2 years ago, keeping it in her name because it was easier for insurance. Mitchell drove it more often than she did. She never minded. And third, a torn page from a notepad filled with familiar handwriting, small with a distinct slant to the left. Mitchell always wrote with a leftward slant, and Audrey used to find it endearing. On the paper was written a number, a specific dollar amount, exactly the amount Audrey had received 3 months ago from selling Grandma Beatrix's lakeside cabin in Wisconsin, a plot of land with an old rundown house and a few apple trees. Everything left from the grandmother who raised Audrey after her mother died. Audrey had hesitated for a long time to sell it, but finally did because property taxes were going up and no one was taking care of the place. She put the money into her personal savings account. She had not told anyone the exact amount except Mitchell. He had casually asked over dinner. "So, how much did the cabin end up going for?" She told him. He nodded, said, "Great," and went back to his phone. Now, that exact figure was written on the paper next to the date the funds cleared, along with a bold question mark, circled twice. He knew, and he was figuring out how to get to that money. Audrey slipped the paper back and closed the folder. Silence fell over the kitchen. In the other room, the cartoons ended and little Chloe shouted, "Mommy, turn on another one." "Just a minute, sweetie." Mallory called back. Her voice trembled slightly on the last syllable. She turned to Audrey. "Give me a second." Audrey nodded. Mallory left the room. From the hallway came the quiet everyday hum of conversation. "Mom, is Dad coming over?" Then Chloe bragging about some drawing. Mallory returned and sat down again. Her eyes were red but dry. "Can I make copies of this?" Audrey asked, pointing to the folder. "Take it all," Mallory replied. "I do not need it anymore." Audrey stood up, took the folder, and froze by the table, not knowing what to say. Every word felt either too big or too small for what hung between them. "Mallory," she finally said, "I knew nothing about you, about Chloe. Or this apartment. Nothing." "I know," Mallory answered, "now I know that." Audrey walked out of the building, and the autumn sun hit her eyes. She squinted, standing on the concrete steps. In the courtyard, the kids were still kicking the ball. A woman on a bench was cracking sunflower seeds. A tabby cat darted across the sidewalk and slipped into the bushes. The world was exactly same, calm, ordinary, completely indifferent to what had just collapsed in a small apartment on the 3rd floor. Audrey pressed the folder to her chest and walked to the street to hail a ride. In her jacket pocket lay the key with the blue head. She did not need it anymore, but she did not throw it away. Not yet. The car dropped her off at her building. Audrey walked up the stairs with the folder tucked under her arm, as if she were carrying perfectly mundane work documents or a bag of groceries. Her neighbor from the 2nd floor, Mrs. Higgins, was fiddling with her lock. Seeing Audrey, she nodded. "Good afternoon, Audrey. You look a bit pale today." "Did not sleep well," Audrey replied and smiled. The smile was genuine, which felt strange. Inside, she took off her jacket, hung it on the hook, went to the kitchen, and put the kettle on. While the water heated, she pulled an ordinary notepad from a drawer, the one she usually used for grocery lists, and sat at the table. She opened a blank page, wrote "to do" at the top, and underlined it. The kettle whistled. She made tea, took a sip, burned her tongue, and set the mug down. She pulled the bank statements from the folder and spread them out in front of her. Then, she picked up her phone. First, the bank. She called customer service, went through security verification, and asked to be transferred to the account management department. Her voice was calm, businesslike. She explained that she needed to transfer all the funds from their joint account into her personal savings. The representative confirmed the balance. Audrey authorized the transfer down to the last penny. The operation took 3 minutes. Next, Mitchell's debit card attached to the joint account. Audrey asked to cancel it. The representative asked for the reason, suspected unauthorized access. She said it was not even a lie. The card was frozen. Then she changed the password to her banking app, wrote the new password in the notepad, tore out the page, and put it in her wallet, checked the box next to the first item. Next, a lawyer. The number had been given to her by Lauren, the same friend who had asked if everything was okay. Lauren had gotten divorced 2 years ago and had been through the whole meat grinder, dividing assets, screaming matches, frayed nerves. She kept the contact for an attorney who, in her words, does not cry with you, but just gets the job done. Audrey dialed the number. He answered on the third ring. "Mr. Harrison, good afternoon, my name is Audrey." Briefly, without extra words, she laid out the situation. Her husband was leading a double life, a second family, a child. She had documentary proof, transfers from the joint account, emails with a middleman about selling her car, notes tracking her personal inheritance money. She needed to protect her assets and file for divorce. Mr. Harrison listened without interrupting. Then he spoke. "First, we file for a freeze on all marital assets so he cannot liquidate anything without your consent. The car, if it is in your name, is yours, but we will put a freeze on it just in case. Second, document every transfer out of that joint account. Pull statements for the last 2 years. Better yet, third, the apartment. If you bought it before the marriage with your own funds, it is not subject to division, but I need all the paperwork, the deed, closing documents, whatever you have. Fourth, do not let him know that you know. As long as he thinks you are in the dark, you have the advantage. Use it." Audrey wrote everything down in her notepad in her neat handwriting, point by point. "When can you come in?" asked Mr. Harrison. "Tomorrow morning at 900 a.m. I will be there." He hung up the second checkmark. The next morning, Audrey went to the courthouse and the bank. The lines were short. It was a Tuesday morning. The waiting areas were mostly filled with retirees holding folders and a young couple with a stroller. Audrey took a ticket, waited her turn, and following the attorney's instructions, filed the necessary paperwork. The clerk, a young woman with long acrylic nails that got in the way of her typing, checked the forms. "This places a freeze on all joint financial accounts and prohibits the transfer of ownership of the vehicle," she confirmed. "Yes." Audrey said. It took less than an hour. Audrey took her certified copies and placed them in the blue folder she got from Mallory. It was her folder now. Next, the car documents. They were in the bottom drawer of the bedroom dresser, under a stack of winter quilts. Mitchell never touched them. He considered managing paperwork to be her responsibility, assuming Audrey never checked them either. The registration, title, bill of sale, insurance policy. Audrey looked over every document, slipped them into a plastic sleeve, and put them in the folder. Then she paused, took them out again, and ran them through the home printer, the one Mitchell bought 2 years ago for work, but which only she ever used. By evening, everything was ready. Audrey sat at the kitchen table. In front of her lay a thick folder sorted into sections. The notepad with check marks, a mug of cold tea. Outside, it was getting dark. A light turned on in the apartment across the street, and Audrey saw the silhouette of a woman setting the table, arranging plates, carrying a pot from the stove. A normal evening for someone else. She picked up her phone and dialed her sister's number. Olivia was 4 years older. She lived in a Chicago suburb, Neepville, and worked as a curriculum coordinator at a middle school. She was married to Spencer, a quiet, reliable guy who fixed anything that broke and never raised his voice. They had 2 boys, a golden retriever, and a big backyard where Olivia spent her summers. They talked on the phone once a week, usually on Sundays. The conversations were always standard. "How are things? How is your health? What is new with Mom?" "Olivia, can you come over?" Audrey asked. A pause hung on the other end of the line. Olivia had never heard her younger sister speak in that tone. Not scared, not crying, but vibrating like a guitar string pulled to its absolute limit. "I am on my way," Olivia said without asking questions. She arrived an hour later. Spencer drove her and stayed in the car to wait. He did not come upstairs. He understood without words that this was not the time for company. Olivia walked into the apartment, took off her coat, and looked at her sister. Audrey stood in the hallway. Her face was calm, her arms resting loosely at her sides. On the kitchen table, clearly visible from the hall, lay the folder, the notepad, and the metal box. "You already figured everything out?" Olivia asked. "Yes," Audrey said. "I just wanted you to know." They went to the kitchen. Audrey laid everything out in front of her sister, from the photographs to the bank statements. She explained briefly, skipping unnecessary details. The box, Mallory, Chloe, the money transfers, the attempt to sell her car, the money from Grandma Beatrix's cabin. Olivia listened in silence. Only her fingers betrayed her, gripping the edge of the table so hard her knuckles turned white. 6 years, Olivia finally said. 6 years of this? Yes. Did you file the papers yet? Not yet. Assets first, then the divorce. The lawyer said, there is no rush to serve him the papers until everything is completely locked down. Olivia nodded, looking at her sister for a long time, like someone she thought she knew, but was meeting for the first time. Audrey, she said quietly, if you need to cry, cry, it is normal. Later, Audrey replied, right now I need a clear head. When this is all over, I will cry. Olivia stayed until 10. They drank tea and talked about practical things. Where to hide the documents, how to act when Mitchell returned. Olivia offered to have Audrey stay with her. Audrey refused. No, she would stay here. This was her apartment, and she was not leaving it. When Olivia left, Audrey walked through the rooms, stopping in the bedroom, looking at the large bed with 2 pillows and the duvet cover. She had spent so much time picking out from a catalog 3 years ago. She wanted it to look beautiful, like in a magazine. She stopped in the living room where their wedding photograph sat on the bookshelf. She in white, he in a suit, both smiling. She did not take the photo down, not yet. She peeked into the storage closet and turned on the flickering light bulb. The metal box was back in its place, hidden behind the mason jars of pickles as if nothing had happened. Audrey turned off the light and closed the door. Then she sat at the kitchen table, opened a blank page in the notepad and wrote, Friday, he returns. Be ready. On Thursday, she went to work as usual. A normal day at the clinic. Spreadsheets, data entry, phone calls. Her coworkers noticed nothing. Audrey drank coffee in the break room, laughed at a joke from Nicole at the front desk, and signed an invoice for office supplies. Everything was exactly the same, except that deep in her purse, inside a zippered pocket, lay a flash drive with scans of every single document made the day before, just in case. On Friday morning, Audrey took the metal box out of the closet. She mechanically wiped the dust off it with a microfiber cloth, then placed it dead center on the kitchen table, right between the salt shaker and the napkin holder. Next to it went the blue folder. Then she tidied the kitchen, washed the dishes, wiped down the stove, hung a fresh towel, poured herself a cup of tea, and waited. Mitchell arrived late in the evening. She heard the heavy front door slam, then the heavy, slow, tired footsteps on the stairs. The key turned in the lock. He walked in exactly the same way he had hundreds of times before. Suitcase dropped in the corner, jacket on the hook, shoes kicked off without untying the laces. Audrey, I am back. He yelled from the hallway. Anything to eat? He walked into the kitchen, opened the fridge, grabbed the water pitcher, poured a glass, took a sip, turned toward the table and froze. The glass stopped halfway to his mouth. The metal box sat in front of him open. The photographs were fanned out like a deck of cards. Next to it, the blue folder, thick with printed pages, and Audrey sitting on the other side, her hands folded neatly in her lap. For a few seconds he just stared, then very slowly lowered the glass to the edge of the table. Water splashed over the rim and dripped onto the wood. He did not notice. Audrey spoke first. Sit down. He sat down, not in his usual chair against the wall, but on the stool closest to him, the one that wobbled slightly on the uneven floor. He sat and stared at the box with the look of a man seeing an object that defies the laws of physics, as if reality had cracked open, and what was supposed to stay buried had crawled out. Audrey took her time. She picked up the first photograph, the Christmas one where he is smiling next to Mallory and holding Chloe, and slid it across the table. He glanced at it, then quickly looked away. The second photograph, Summer the Park. Chloe and sandals. She placed it next to the first, the child's drawing. Daddy Mitch, I love you. She placed it down. The lease agreement, placed it down. Receipts for kids' boots and paint, placed it down. The greeting card. We are waiting for you at home. We miss you. Your girls placed it down. Bank statements. A year and a half of transfers 2 or 3 times a month, straight out of their joint account. placed it down. Emails with Ryan about how to forge her signature to sell her car, placed it down. And finally, the note with the exact sum from the sale of Grandma Beatrix's cabin and the bold question marks, placed it down. The table between them was covered in paper, all cards face up. Audrey sat perfectly still and waited. Mitchell was silent for a long time, maybe a minute, but that minute stretched like rubber. In the silence you could hear the ticking of the pendulum clock and through the wall, the faint voice of a local news anchor on TV. Then he spoke. His voice was raspy, as if something was caught in his throat. Audrey, you misunderstood. It is a complicated situation, it is not what you think. She did not interrupt, she simply reached into the folder, pulled out the bank statement for the previous month, with 3 transfers highlighted in neon yellow marker, and slid it toward him. Listen. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. I can explain everything. It is not what it looks like. It is a completely different story. Audrey said nothing. She picked up the printed emails about selling her car and tapped it with her index finger, and then he flipped. A second ago, he was pleading, and the next. His eyes grew hard, his jaw clenched. You went through my things. I told you not to go into that closet. Those are my things, my space. You had no right. Audrey waited for him to finish. He ran out of steam quickly. The anger was hollow because the evidence lay right in front of him, and they both knew his outrage was absurd. It was like a man screaming, "It was not me." While standing over a shattered vase with a hammer in his hand, his shoulders dropped. He hung his head, covered his face with his hands and spoke in a dull, choked voice. I got confused. Audrey, I did not want it to turn out this way. I love you both. It just happened. I did not plan it, Chloe. She is just a little girl. I could not abandon a little girl. Do you understand? Every day I thought about how to fix it. Every day I put it off because I did not know how. Just give me time. I will explain everything. Let us just sit down and talk. Audrey listened. She waited to feel something. Pity, maybe, or at least that familiar softness, that internal yielding that had made her compromise for 9 years. The urge to say, all right, maybe we can figure it out. But inside her, there was absolute silence, like a room where all the furniture had been moved out, empty, echoing. Every sound bounced cleanly off the walls. You were not building a marriage, Audrey said. It was the first time all evening she had spoken about herself. Her voice was steady without a tremor, without shouting. You were building a fire escape. You were siphoning money. You tried to sell my car. You tracked my inheritance. That is not getting confused. That is an exit strategy. Mitchell lowered his hands and looked at her, and she saw that for the first time all evening. He truly saw her, not as a wife, not as someone who needed to be managed or pacified, but as a person who knew exactly who he was and who would never fall for it again. He had no answer. Audrey stood up. She carefully gathered the documents from the table, stacking them in the exact order she had laid them out, and put them back into the blue folder. The photos went back into the tin box. She snapped the lid shut. I am filing for divorce next week, she said. The apartment is mine. I bought it before we got married. The car is mine. The title is in my name. The joint account is currently empty. If you want to discuss the details, you can call Mr. Harrison. Here is his number. She placed the lawyer's business card on the table and walked out of the kitchen. Mitchell remained sitting alone at the table, staring at the empty space where his carefully constructed double life had just been dismantled. The glass of water still sat on the edge of the table. The puddle underneath it had grown and was slowly dripping onto the floor. Legally, the whole thing took 4 months. At first, Mitchell was certain he could drag the process out. Stalling was his superpower. Honed over 6 years of living a double life, he hired a chief attorney recommended by a buddy who immediately began filing motions to postpone hearings, requesting extensions, demanding asset appraisals. Standard tactics. Wear the other side down, drain their energy, wait for them to give up and settle. But Audrey did not give up, and she did not settle. At the very first mediation meeting, a reality Mitchell had not anticipated came to light. That joint account he was banking on was empty. The funds had been legally transferred by a co-owner of the account. His debit card was frozen. A temporary freeze had been placed on the car, the apartment, and any property that could be deemed marital assets. And Audrey's side brought a mountain of paperwork, statements showing transfers to Mallory, the emails with Ryan, the auto dealer, notes tracking her inheritance. Mr. Harrison operated with the cold precision of a surgeon. At the second hearing, he handed the judge statements covering 18 months, proving that Mitchell had systematically siphoned marital funds behind his wife's back. Mitchell's lawyer tried to argue these were standard household expenses. But the amounts, the frequency, and the name on the receiving account spoke for themselves. The judge, a woman in her 50s with tired eyes and reading glasses perched on the tip of her nose, looked at Mitchell over her frames and said nothing. But the way she decisively straightened the stack of papers on her desk made it clear. She understood exactly what kind of man was sitting in her courtroom. The car. Mitchell did not get it. The bill of sale was in Audrey's name, dated before the marriage. The insurance was paid exclusively from her personal account. Mr. Harrison brought everything. Mitchell tried to claim he had put significant sweat equity into maintaining the vehicle, but could not produce a single receipt for an oil change or new tires because he had never bought them. Audrey paid for the maintenance. Mitchell just drove it. The apartment, the one where they had lived for 9 years, with the flickering light bulb in the closet and the ticking pendulum clock. Audrey kept it, bought 2 years before the wedding entirely with her money. The deed was ironclad. Mitchell tried to argue he had made substantial renovations that increased its value. Mr. Harrison asked for contractor invoices, receipts for building materials, or at least before and after photos. Mitchell had nothing. Audrey had managed all the upgrades. She picked out the backsplash tile. She hired the painters. She wrote the checks. Mitchell once screwed a curtain rod into the drywall, and that was the absolute extent of his contribution. By the 3rd month, Mitchell changed tactics. He stopped calling Mr. Harrison and started calling Audrey directly, at first at night, then during the day when she was at the clinic, and he shifted constantly, pleading, irritable, soft, nostalgic. He tried on different voices like a burglar trying different keys on a lock that had already been changed. Audrey, let us just meet and talk without the lawyers. We are adults. We can settle this between ourselves. She answered exactly once. Everything I wanted to say, I have already said. After that, she stopped picking up. She did not block his number. She just let him ring. Her phone would vibrate on the desk, the screen flashing Mitchell, and Audrey would watch the letters glow until the screen went dark. She was amazed at how little that name meant to her now. 9 years ago, it meant everything. 4 months ago, it still meant something. Now, it was just pixels on a screen that would soon be deleted. At the beginning of the 4th month, Mitchell stopped calling. A week later, he signed the settlement agreement. The divorce was finalized in the middle of winter on a Thursday in a courthouse hallway, smelling of floor wax and cheap coffee. Audrey signed the decree, took her copy, and walked out through the double doors. Freezing rain was falling, making the sidewalk slick. She stopped on the top step, tilted her head back, and stood like that for 10, maybe 15 seconds. The icy drops hit her cheeks and ran down her neck. Then she tucked the envelope into her bag and walked toward the train station. She learned what happened to Mallory slowly in pieces, without actively looking for information. It is a small world. After that confrontation in the kitchen, Mitchell drove straight to Mahler's. He did not call ahead. He just showed up with his suitcase that same night, exactly as he had shown up hundreds of times before, and rang the buzzer. Mallory opened the door, looked at the suitcase, then at his pale, panicked face, and instantly understood everything. She kicked you out. Mallory said, "We are getting a divorce," he answered quickly, as if afraid she would close the door before he finished his speech. "Everything is going to be different now. I am moving in here for good, just like you wanted." Mallory stood in the doorway and looked at him. For 6 years, she had waited for those words. For 6 years, she had fantasized about the day he would come and say, I choose you. And here he was with baggage, with promises, ready to commit. Only it felt completely different now. It did not feel like a choice. It felt like a man running out of a burning building and jumping into the nearest open window. You did not come to me because you want to be here, Mallory said quietly. You came here because you have nowhere else to go. He began to beg. Swore it was not true that he had wanted this for a long time. He just could not bring himself to do it. But now they could finally be a real family. Mallory listened. She thought about how just 3 weeks ago she had been sitting in her kitchen with Audrey, a stranger, her man's wife, and how they both had the exact same look in their eyes. Exhaustion. Not anger, not jealousy, just a bone-deep exhaustion from living a lie that had dragged on so long it disguised itself as a normal life. No, Mallory said. I do not think so. The next day, she packed the rest of his things, 2 gym bags, his heavy winter coat, his winter boots, his electric razor, a phone charger, and a stack of dress shirts he kept in her closet. She packed everything neatly, zipped it up, and carried it down to the lobby. The doorman, an older man who knew Mitchell well from seeing him pass his desk for 5 years, was on duty. These are Mitchell's things, Mallory told him. He will come by to pick them up. The doorman looked at the bags, then at her, and did not ask a single question. He just dragged them over to the wall by the mailboxes. Mitchell came for them that same day and tried to buzz the apartment. Mallory did not answer. He stood in the lobby, pressing the button over and over. Silence on the other end, then the crackle of the speaker and little Chloe's voice. Mommy, who is it? No one, sweetie. Wrong apartment. He left. He moved into a spare room at his buddy Julian's place. Julian was divorced himself and lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in a distant suburb. The room was empty, just a sagging futon and a closet without a door. The whole apartment smelled of cigarette smoke and cat food. Julian's tabby cat roamed the place like he owned it and slept wherever he pleased. Julian was just glad for the company and someone to split the rent. He did not ask too many questions, having been through the meat grinder himself. Mitchell lived out of 2 gym bags in that room, spending his nights scrolling through his phone, staring at old photos of Chloe that Mallory had sent him when things were good. She had not blocked his number. He reread old texts, and only in those moments did any sign of life appear in his eyes. About 6 months after the divorce, Audrey heard the rest of the story from Julian himself, whom she bumped into at the grocery store. Mitchell was desperately trying to get back with Mallory. He bought toys for Chloe and left them with the doorman in the lobby, wrote Mallory long graveling emails. He would show up and sit on a bench in the courtyard, waiting for them to come outside. She will not let him in, Julian said, standing in the checkout line with a box of pasta and a jar of instant coffee. Yesterday, he sat on that bench for 2 hours. Chloe saw him from the window and waved. He waved back, and then Mallory just pulled the curtains shut. Audrey listened, nodded politely, paid for her bread, milk, and oranges, and walked outside. The street was washed with a warm, late spring breeze. She thought of Chloe waving to her father from the window and the drawn curtain, and realized that this story had no happy ending. There were only varying degrees of sad ones. And then she realized something else. It was no longer her story. She was completely free of it. That autumn, Audrey finally tackled the project she had been putting off all year. On a Saturday morning, she put on old jeans and a faded t-shirt, tied a bandana in her hair, and opened the door to the storage closet. The flickering light bulb greeted her with its familiar stutter. Half a second of light, half a second of darkness. Audrey reached up and unscrewed it. She walked down the hall to the bathroom cabinet, grabbed a brand new 60 WLD bulb from a spare pack, walked back and screwed it in. The closet was flooded with bright, steady quiet. For the first time, she saw the whole space clearly without shadows. 5 feet by 3, the linoleum peeling slightly at the corners. 4 wooden shelves unevenly screwed into the wall. On the bottom shelf, tools no one would ever use. The drill with which Mitchell had hung 1 curtain rod in 9 years, a box of mismatched screws, an adjustable wrench. On the middle shelf, his mother's preserves, cloudy brine, rusty lids. Audrey picked up one jar and checked the date written in Sharpie on the lid. 3 years. No one had opened them, and no one ever was going to. She started from the top, pulling down the empty cardboard boxes. One held a cracked lampshade, another a tangle of old extension cords. The third was empty. She tossed them all into a large trash bag by the front door. Next were the jars, one after another, heavy and cloudy. She carried them to the kitchen, popped the lids off, and dumped the contents into the garbage disposal. Cucumbers, peppers, some unidentified relish, it all went down the drain. She washed the glass jars with hot soapy water and left them upside down on a towel to dry. She packed the tools into a plastic bin. They might come in handy. She kept the drill and the screws. The adjustable wrench was useful. Olivia had mentioned once that Spencer lost his, she would give it to him. By noon, the shelves were completely bare. Audrey wiped them down with a damp rag. The cloth turned dark gray after one swipe. She rinsed it and wiped them again and again, then scrubbed the walls as high as she could reach, and finally the floor. Under the layer of grime, the linoleum turned out to be a light, cheerful beige. She had forgotten its original color. On the clean shelves, she began placing her own things. The box with photographs, not wedding albums, not pictures of Mitchell, but her own history. Old Polaroids from her childhood, photos of her picking apples at Grandma Beatrix's cabin, her mother in her youth, Grandma under the apple trees, school yearbooks. Next to the photos, a stack of hardcover books that did not fit on the bedroom shelf. Audrey loved rereading her favorites, and some were so worn the pages had turned soft and wavy. Beside the books, a small velvet box holding Grandma Beatrix's silver and turquoise earrings, which Audrey rarely wore, but guarded like the apple of her eye. On the bottom shelf, she placed her own jars, peach preserves. She had made it herself last summer for the first time in her life, following a recipe from the internet. It turned out a little too sweet, but Olivia swore it was perfect with hot tea. It would do. 3 quart-sized mason jars with cute labels she had cut from cardstock and written on with a marker. Peach Summer. She stepped back into the hallway and looked. The closet was small, bright, and spotlessly clean. It smelled of fresh pine cleaner and faintly of sweet peaches, even though the jars were sealed tight. The shelves were full, and every single item on them belonged to her. From the photo albums to the last screw in the toolbox, not a single trace of anyone else, not a single foreign object. Audrey leaned against the doorframe and thought about how just 6 months ago, she had stood on the step-stool in this exact spot, reaching over those cloudy jars, and how the metal box had crashed to the floor, popping its lid and splitting her world in two. It had not happened because of a dramatic fight or a cruel, calculated confession. It happened because of a cheap tin box hidden behind pickled cucumbers. That day, she could have chosen not to climb the stool. She could have listened to Mitchell and respected his territory. She could have lived another year, 2, 5 years in that dim, flickering half-light, mistaking it for a marriage, but she climbed the stool and the box fell at the worst possible moment or the most perfect one. She still was not sure which. Maybe both at once. She flicked the switch, turning off the bright, steady light of the new bulb, and closed the door. The latch clicked. The kitchen was bathed in late afternoon sun. The window faced west, and the autumn light poured across the table and the floor, catching the red geraniums Audrey had bought over the summer, simply because she saw them at a nursery and thought, "Those are beautiful. I will take them." Before, she would have texted Mitchell, "Do you mind if I get some plants for the window?" Now, there was no one to ask, and it felt incredibly good. She poured herself a mug of tea, sat at the table, and wrapped both hands around the warm ceramic. Outside it was a crisp, dry autumn day. The trees in the courtyard were turning gold, and the faint smell of wood smoke drifted in from the suburbs, mixing with the smell of fried chicken from the downstairs neighbors. She had a lot to do. Audrey knew this, not in a vague, overwhelming way, but in a very concrete, manageable way, like a daily to-do list. She needed to call a plumber to fix the bathroom faucet that had been dripping for a week. She needed to swap her summer clothes for her winter sweaters. She needed to call her mother and finally tell her the whole story. She had been putting it off to spare the older woman the stress, but the time had come. She needed to schedule a dental cleaning. She was 6 months overdue. She needed to pick out new wallpaper for the bedroom. She was tired of the old pattern, and Olivia had offered to come over on the weekend to help her strip the old paper and hang the new one. Small, ordinary life tasks, the things real life is made of. Audrey finished her tea, washed the mug, and set it on the drying rack. Then she picked up her phone and typed a text. Olivia, come over on Saturday. Let us pick out that wallpaper. I will send you home with a jar of peach preserves. I know you are out. Olivia replied in less than a minute. I will be there, and I am dragging Spencer along so he can fix that crooked curtain rod in your bedroom. It has been driving me crazy for 3 years. Audrey smiled. Not that polite, tight half smile she had learned to use over the last few years, but a real smile, the kind where the corners of your mouth lift all on their own, completely without effort. Outside the window, the sun was setting behind the brick roofs, and the shadows in the courtyard were stretching out. Down below, a child let out a loud, ringing laugh. On the bench by the front doors, Mrs. Higgins was gossiping with another neighbor. Snatches of their conversation drifted up to the third-floor window. So I told him, you have to water the roots, not complain about the leaves. An ordinary autumn evening, an ordinary apartment building, an ordinary life. Only now it was hers, truly, completely, entirely hers.